Good afternoon, good morning for many of you, and good evening for many other colleagues around the world. It is a pleasure to have you here with us today. This is the last series of 3 events that we have organized with many collaborating agencies that you see on the screen as well. The topic here that we've been discussing for the last couple of days and that we conclude today with the last session. It's on climate finance. We had 2 fantastic previous sessions on climate finance in the last 2 days. I'm not going to go into any details. We have a closing remarks by our colleague Olympus Mantata from the Development Bank of South Africa that will provide a concise summary of the main items and issues that were discussed during the last 3 days, including this session. But I just want to stress that we have been discussing several of the opportunities and limitations of climate finance and the role of water in climate and the broader developmental agenda. We learned that this should be one integrated agenda, not 3 different agendas. We have the SDG climate agenda and the water agenda, and the discussions point to the fact that we should look at this as in an integrated way. As this is also jeopardizing the way that we are relabeling the existing funding sources from public sources and also from private sources. The issue that we'll be covering in this last session is how to get water more prominent in the climate agenda and the SDG agenda, how to go to scale with many of the policies and programs and projects that we have been presenting in the last couple of days, how to create and promote an enabling environment, including the use of some legal instruments that we saw in the past couple of days, and economic and financial instruments, how to green and even more the green, resilient and inclusive agenda that we are promoting around the world, and how to ensure inclusiveness and equity of this agenda. So we hope that we can cover a lot of this ground and how we move forward in this very short hour that we have. Today, the program is packed with very interesting sessions. We're going to start with a keynote speech that was recorded as a participant was not able to be with us today, but this by Per Holgren. This is an 8-minute video that we'll show in a few minutes. That will be followed by a panel discussion of distinguished colleagues from different institutions to react to some of the issues that were presented in the video in the last couple of days. That will be followed by a case study presentation from a very interesting case in a utility in Colombia, in Medellin. For that, the presentation will be in Spanish. For those that need translation and simultaneous interpretation, you can download the Interactio app on your smartphone, and I think all the instructions are in the program. We will continue with the panel discussion, reacting to some of the interesting activities that are being promoted in Medellin. And finally, we'll finish the program with a closing by Olympus Matata, our colleague from the Development Bank from South Africa, with some concluding remarks and reflections over the 3 events that we held. So with that, I would like to start the program with the first keynote with a speech recording that we have from Per Holmgren. He's currently, it's a very interesting case, and you see from the video very interesting reflections. He's currently a member of the European Parliament for the Swedish Green Party, and he was for more than 30 years as a climate and meteorological scientist who is now trying to promote these aspects of bringing science into policy and into decisions at the European Parliament. So with that in mind, I would like then if we can start showing the video, and then we can move to the panel. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you very, very much for having me at this seminar. For those who do not know me or met me previously, my name is Per Holmgren. I'm a trained meteorologist. I've been working with climate change related issues for actually close to 30 years now, giving lectures at most of the universities here in Sweden, and have written a number of books on these topics. But today, since 2 years ago, I'm a member of the European Parliament, and in that position I of course try to link politics with science, something that of course gets more and more urgent for each and every day. Once again, this summer we've seen a number of cases with extreme weather events all over the world, not the least here in Europe and of course in Canada, in China, in the United States. And for the first time, I would say, the IPCC is showing now in the latest report the connection between climate change and extreme weather events. And when we're discussing extreme weather events, water really plays an important role. Many areas of the world are getting a future, are racing into a future where they will have too much water or too less water. So when we're discussing climate change and climate adaptation, water really plays an important key role, not the least when it comes to the poor parts of the world. Parts of the world who haven't really caused the climate change, but they are suffering the consequences of the climate change the most. So while people are experiencing water or lack of water in the forms of floods, droughts, salt water intrusion, bad harvests or whatever, water also plays a key role when it comes to resilience and adaptation to a warmer climate. So water links the problems, and very important, water also links the solutions. About 1/3 of the global population already now lives in areas that we can describe as water stressed. And already by 2025, that is just a few years from now, 1.8 billion people will live in areas with water scarcity. And if we look at the women and girls all around the world, they collectively spend around 200 million hours each and every year. That is approximately 23,000 years each year to fetch water. And that is such a strong and very important example of why we need to address climate justice when it comes to climate change, not the least when we're discussing water. Yet, research has found that less than 1% of the total global climate investments goes to protecting water services for poor communities. And during the first 2 decades of this century, only 18% of international public climate finance for water went to low-income countries. And only a part of this was given as grants. Now, as COVID is squeezing international finance further, at the same time as vulnerabilities increase, it is absolutely essential to target the finance as efficiently and far as possible. While access to water and sanitation, of course, is fundamental for each and every one of us, water is also basic for the whole economy, the whole finance for the global world. It's really a fundamental part of agricultural, industrial, energy production, and so on. So when we transform our societies to a fossil-free future, the sooner the better, we really need to pay very close attention to the fact that water and other materials as well, other resources are limited for once and all, we need to respect the planetary boundaries and have that in mind when we plan for the sustainable future. All of these interlinked challenges means, of course, that we need to approach climate change, climate adaptation from a systemic perspective, as a systemic challenge. It's very, very important now that we build solutions that are sustainable in the long run and not just trying to fix the problems that are ahead of us with short-time solutions that could, in the worst case, create even bigger problems in the long run. In November, it's time for COP26 in Glasgow, and I will be the delegate for the European Parliament for the Green Group. And in addition to much higher ambitions when it comes to climate mitigation, we really need to step up when it comes to climate adaptation. The next coming report from the IPCC will once again show that the situation is even worse than they thought in the previous report, and we need to accept the fact that the chances of keeping the temperature below 2 degrees during this century is decreasing very, very, very fast. And because of that, of course, we need to step up the ambitions when it comes to climate adaptation, not the least when it comes to water resources. Globally, we're now at 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures, and we will reach 1.5 degrees sometime during the next decade. And I really, really hope that we don't need to try to adopt to temperatures well above 2 degrees, but we are heading in that direction during this century. And to avoid that, we really need to step up when it comes to ambitions in climate policies, in mitigation and adaptation. As vaccines are increasingly being rolled out all over the world, countries are investing a lot now to build back stronger after this crisis. And I really hope that these investments will be in a greener, more sustainable direction, because this is, after all, an opportunity to create a greener, more sustainable future for us all. And in that transition, we desperately need to realize that water is a very, very limited resource, and a sustainable water program is something that should be in the core of this transition. And after all, we cannot afford to continue business as usual. Once again, thank you very much for having me at this seminar, and I really wish you all the best for the rest of this seminar.
Well, I think this is a fantastic way to start our session. I heard with great interest Par's view, and I think many of us hope to have legislators like Par in our countries and in our client countries that we work on. I think we heard a lot of interesting things from his presentation on climate change and water. And here we will be discussing with the next panel, with the next members of the panel, how to move forward and advance the issues that we discussed the last 2 days in our events. I think what is clear from his message is that water is part of the problem, but water is part of the solution as well. And for this, we need to be much more efficient in how we use the financial resources, the existing financial resources, both from the public and the private sector, taking into account planetary boundaries, the need for sustainable and inclusive solutions. So, and that we need to step up our work on adaptation, not only on mitigation. All of these things, I think we tried to cover them well in the last 2 days. But I think now we have invited several colleagues to be part of this very interesting panel discussion to present from their own experiences and their own institutions some of these solutions and how we can scale them up to be able to address some of the problems and the challenges that were presented by Par and other colleagues. We have a very interesting panel of different institutions and colleagues from around the world with diverse experiences. You can see the bios in the program, so I will not extend myself too much in introducing them. I will introduce one by one in order with, and we'll ask each one of them a question and then introduce the second or the next panelist, if that's okay. Let me start by introducing Johan Lube. He's a disruption specialist at the Development Bank of South Africa in the Office of the Chief Investment Officer. He has been responsible for the identification, conceptualization, and development of innovative financial products in infrastructure, water, energy, transportation, social, and ICT sectors. And he's been working on very interesting initiatives, and we would like to hear more from him on some of the challenges and the opportunities that he sees. No? So Johan, let me start with this question for you. Based on your experience and your work on innovative financing solutions, particularly in respect to a water reuse program in South Africa that you have that is tackling several municipalities. What are those innovative solutions that you think could be scaled up or taken to scale, particularly when we look at the identification of different revenue streams from these projects? And what are you think some of the lessons that we can learn from other regions around the world and on how we can apply some of these programs that you are implementing in South Africa? Johan, the floor is yours. You have around 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diego, and well, good evening from my side, and thank you very much for the opportunity. So, just like to share some experiences and some work that we are currently doing in South Africa. So many of you would know that South Africa ranks as one of the driest countries in the world currently, and also one of the countries that is deemed to be the worst affected by climate change. So having said that, I think we're still losing a lot of that valuable resource down our rivers and into the ocean. So what we're trying to do with the design of a national water reuse program is really to see how we can scale the preparation, the implementation, and the financing of large-scale water reuse projects within South Africa to really address some of these water challenges that we are facing and bring water reuse into the water mix alongside other initiatives like groundwater, desalination, etc. So what we are doing in terms of the water reuse program is really to create a center of excellence, look at it from a programmatic perspective, and address some of the challenges that we are facing. So looking at creating the enabling environment to support water reuse projects at scale within the country, looking and seeing how we can support proper project preparation, so the design, the development of water reuse projects at scale. One of the key elements within this programmatic approach is to look at developing a standardized approach. We tend to see us reinventing the wheel every time we do a new project, and there's so much benefit in creating a standardized approach, not only fast tracking implementation, but also reducing the cost of what it costs us to get projects to the market. And then also a very important point around water reuse is the whole communication and awareness campaign that is necessary when one starts talking about water reuse. So within that water reuse context, we not only want to extract maximum value from the water side itself, but also looking at energy generation, the sludge beneficiation component. We tend to talk about wastewater treatment works in South Africa. The moment you talk about waste, you think there's no value. So we want to change that mindset to say, let's start talking about water resource centers instead of wastewater treatment works, because we can extract that value. And then the second element that we are working on is really the financing of this program. So looking at blended finance initiatives, we want to see how we can, in an innovative way, bring climate finance into a blended finance structure, bring climate finance in alongside development finance institutions with providing credit enhancement to projects, and then really trying to open up and catalyze private sector investment into that space. So getting the commercial banks, our asset managers, our pension funds to invest in this new asset class that will really enable us then to be able to roll out and finance water reuse projects at scale. So that climate finance element is extremely important. You know, bringing concessional finance in, bringing guarantee products in, bringing grant products in, to see how we can try and unlock a blended finance solution. And part of that solution is looking at different instruments. We also working on creating a project bond program specifically for water reuse projects. So it's important to also create the pipeline to show investors that, you know, the pipeline is there, and once that is there and we can create the bankable projects, we can move forward into implementation and using the different blended finance structures, the different instruments that is available, and then creating that standardized and programmatic approach. I'll pause there for now, Diego, and yeah, so this is just quickly some of the work that we are doing at the moment in South Africa.
Excellent, Johan. Many thanks for your insights. I think that many of us are trying to push more and more in our countries, client countries, precisely these reuse options with extracting as much values as you can from treatment facilities. No? In the sake of time, if we have any questions from any of the participants, we'll try to address them a bit later, but let me move to the second panelist. I am gonna go to Silvia Cardassia. She's a water and natural resources management specialist at the ADB. She joined as a young professional in 2018 and has been working on projects for integrated water and natural resources management in China and Mongolia. Silvia, you are a young professional at the ADB, so you will be working and exposed to climate finance for years to come. Where do you see are the biggest challenges and opportunities for more inclusive and innovative water management approaches in the post-pandemic years?
Thank you very much, Diego. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today and to react to the very interesting keynote speech. Let me start with the region where I work with, which is Asia. And as we all know, human-induced climate change is getting significantly worse in this region, in the Asia and the Pacific. The people who are the most vulnerable to these impacts and to extreme events of a warming planet are actually the poor. And in particular, young people, for instance, are the ones that will be most affected by climate change, simply because they have to deal with the consequences of today's decisions. So just a quick data. In Mongolia, for instance, which is one of the countries that I work with, youth aged between 15 and 34 represent the largest demographic group in the country, and they're approximately 35%, which is about 1 million. So they're the one who are going to suffer the most from the impact of climate change, because Mongolia is experiencing some of the fastest rates of global warming in the world. So giving this background, I think that the real challenge to sustainably manage water and natural resources in a context of green recovery is to reconcile at least 3 aspects, which are very important in my opinion. So the first one is to improve water security. The second one is to prioritize ecosystem-based adaptation. And the third one is to address social inequalities, to reduce poverty in regions such as Asia, but also other developing countries as well. First of all, water security can be defined as the availability of an adequate quantity and quality of water to ensure safe, affordable, and especially equitable and inclusive water supply and sanitation, and also to be able to respond to water-related risks. So improving water security can considerably reduce exposure and vulnerabilities to climate risks. Having said that, in Asia and the Pacific, about 300 million people still have no access to safely managed or basic services of drinking water, and about 1.2 billion lack adequate access to sanitation. So there are different strategies to sustainably manage water resources and to provide inclusive access to water and sanitation services. And I'm not here to mention all of them because they're too many. But some of them, which I think are important, is for instance, to make more comprehensive watershed assessments, for instance, that incorporate climate risks. As Johan was saying, treating industrial or urban wastewater to then reuse it for other purposes. At the same time, we also need to look at water quality, and so to reduce the nutrient loads within our rivers and the lake bodies, and addressing climate water scarcity, accounting also for the environment and so the environmental flows. Increasing water storage facilities at household level, but also for livelihoods is very important. And of course, we can't do all these things without adopting water management regulations and legislation, and also providing economic incentives to accompany the set of solutions that I've just mentioned. The second aspect that I want to mention is actually we need to move to an idea that goes beyond more ecosystem-based adaptation. What it means is that we need a strategy that promotes nature-based solutions and ecosystem services. So let me give you an example. Protecting coastal habitats like mangroves can provide natural flood defense, or reforestation can hold back desertification and recharge groundwater supplies in times of drought, for instance. And water bodies like river or lakes, they actually provide a natural drainage to reduce flooding. So in other words, ecosystem-based adaptation can have win-win solutions. On the one hand, it can really protect the communities and the most vulnerable communities who live climate extreme events. But at the same time, it can also provide ecological benefits such as clean water, food, and climate regulation. The third and last aspect, which I think is probably the most important and the most challenging to achieve, is to address social inequality. Engaging young people and the youth, as we define them, meaningfully can actually help break some of the existing social barriers. So, for instance, there are different ways in which we can engage meaningfully, and I say meaningfully because I think it's important to underline that we really need to treat young people as agents of change, and so we need to really give young people the skills, education, and opportunities to have access to the tools, the guidance, educational resources, but at the same time mentorship program, paid internship, leadership, and young professional programs like the one that I joined myself are very important to give young people a voice in the future, in the policies that are going to be designed in the future and that are going to affect also them as beneficiaries. The second aspect about young engagement is actually to support the development of youth-led projects. And this can be done in different ways, either to fund adaptation projects, co-designed with the youth, or just having the youth as really the lead organizations for this project. Just to conclude, encouraging youth participation, in my opinion, it's not only about engaging youth or young faces or women faces in conferences like this, or maybe in conferences like COP26, because they're very important, but they end after a week. It is very important to meaningfully engage young people, which means making them participate in decision-making processes and at all stages of policy, from policy design processes down to the project level, and actually making them, engaging them locally where they live can really have concrete outcome and long-lasting impacts. So what they do can actually be visible in their communities as well. So let me stop here and thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, very much for your insights on the participation of youth in decision making and the big push on nature-based solutions. I think we also had quite a series of interesting presentation and discussions in the last couple of days. Now let me move to Hassan Abulga, who is now the vice chair, good friend of vice chair of the Middle East Water Forum. So we are covering also some perspective from Africa, from Asia, and now from the Middle East. Hassan has recently completed his PhD from Germany, working on urban water security, and is also the vice chair of the Middle East Water Forum. Hassan, we go to the Middle East, which is a region particularly affected by water scarcity and with serious economic, social, and ecological dimensions. Which areas do you think need more climate finance as soon as possible? And how can we get there? How can we tap more into those resources in a region where facing so many water challenges as the Middle East? The floor is yours, Hassan. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Diego, for having me, and for everyone to participate in this important discussion. As the Middle East is the most water scarce region in the world, we have been facing great change pressures of increasing demand coupled with climate extremes such as floods and droughts. All of this put a great pressure on our socio-economic development, vulnerability of our water resources, and the way we manage water today. And by doing so, you see that the Arab region is off track, like many countries, when it comes to achieving the SDG 6 on safely managed water and sanitation. You see most of the Middle East, they have intermittency of water supply where people receive water only once or twice per week, such as in Jordan, in Lebanon, and in many countries, all of this under fragile contexts. And if you see at the solution or areas that we need to look at, it would be mainly directed to vulnerable people and the poor people who hurt first and worst in our communities. And for that, if you look to the solutions that we need to bring in this region, we need a new paradigm shift, completely paradigm shift in the way we manage water, in the way we finance water, in the way we cooperate with each other, and the way we also design our policies. In the way we manage water, we have to shift from this linear system of use and dispose to more circular economy model. And this mainly to shift from the mindset of infrastructure delivery, which many development agencies are doing, to more resilient services. And consequently, you see now many people in the Arab region are connected to the water network, but don't have water and tap in what is called the intermittent water supply. And as Johan said, also one of the most important aspects is mainly wastewater, in which 80% of our wastewater in the region is being discharged without getting use of it. And the other also a very important aspect, the high level of non-revenue water. Imagine in an area of one of the most scarce region in the world, half of the water that has been treated, produced, and distributed to the people is being lost. And this is a loss of everything financially, from climate, from environmentally, and from different aspects. In the way we finance water, let's also, to be frank, it is not enough for us to say about climate finance. It's a finance for climate. Any water project can be a climate project. And for that to reflect this, there is a clear gap in the region when it comes to climate finance in terms of quantity and quality. And you see now that only 5 of 22 Arab countries only have access finance from multilateral green climate fund. So there is a need for a new sources of finance from both public resources and the private sector, and solving the problem of creditworthy of water utilities in the region. And when it comes also to the way we cooperate with each other, climate change issues in the region cannot be handled by the country or the national measures. It has to go cooperation. As you know, 60% of our water is coming from outside the region, and you see now the implications that is happening in one of the most or the important water resources in the region, whether the Nile River or Euphrates or also the Jordan Basin. They have a problem on it, so these areas has to be tackled if we need really to address water security and food security as well. So for that, what I will conclude on that is that, as Bear has been saying, if we keep on business as usual and the building on the current solutions, and also saying that we will go for a different solution without addressing this holistic approach, especially where we are saying about the integration. And you will see the last UN water report is just about a few days ago on the level of integrated water resources management in the region, in the Arab region in particular, is very low. And this has to be addressed very critically also by development agencies and all water stakeholders. And for that, it's required from all water stakeholders to rethink the role of water in development. And for all of these issues, climate role, the climate adaptation is really important when it comes to the resilience of the communities and the resilience of infrastructure at the same time. And just as the last point, when it comes to the climate projects, many projects in the region, when it comes to development projects, are being developed in the wrong place. When there is a floods in areas where also have impact in many parts of the region, where also many incidents happen when there is a floods in areas of residential or also road, which mainly destroys the infrastructure that has been developed, which is very costly. Thanks so much, Diego, and I would be happy to go more.
Thank you, Hassan, for your insights from the Middle East. I liked also your comments on the food security aspects and the sort of the nexus thinking, the need to integrate, and also what you said on the moving from the infra delivery model to the resilience services. Is the infrastructure that we need to accomplish for an outcome and objective of resilience delivery. In the sake of time, now let's move to the last panelist. And I know he's probably very sleepy because it's like 4 a.m. I think in the Philippines. But our final panelist is Tom Panella, also a good friend. He's currently the Director of Environment, Natural Resources, Agriculture in East Asia in the Asian Development Bank. He's responsible for water sector policy, knowledge and innovation, and portfolio enhancement. And he also served as ADB country director in Afghanistan for 3 years. Tom, it's a pleasure having you here. I know that it's probably very late for you, so we'll try to keep it brief, this last question. But could you please describe the role that the ADB plays at the moment when it comes to inclusive and innovative water management approaches? And if you have any examples of the type of activities and programs or policies that have worked over the last years and areas of improvement, as we are discussing today, is how we can move forward and scale up many of the programs and initiatives that we have. I think it's very important also to look at the lessons learned from the past years. No? Tom, the floor is yours, and thanks for staying with us so late.
Sí, muchas gracias, Diego. Buenos días, buenas noches a todos. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to respond, but I may respond a bit differently, taking on Per's comment, but really kind of looking at the links between climate change adaptation and green recovery in light of the COVID, and certainly with COVID, you know, water has been at the forefront of addressing the pandemic in terms of just basic wash. But as we see, it also is an opportunity with the recovery to build forward a greener, more resilient future. Certainly at ADB, we've been doing many things in terms of strategy, documents for the bank as a whole, for countries, technical assistance, even altering some of our loan projects to do this. But really, I want to just talk about building back better and greener. You know, we need to address the synergy between ecosystem degradation and adapting to climate change. Now, Per spoke, and a lot of the discussion has been on COP26, but we also have COP15 coming up. And I think we need to explicitly think about the linkages between the two, between biodiversity and nature and climate change adaptation. And, you know, this is all about planetary boundaries. It's about nature being the solution as well as being threatened. So let me give you 3 examples of things that we've done at ADB to try and move this agenda forward. First, we need to look at nature-based and climate solutions that target enhancement of ecosystem services. So, for example, water-sensitive urban design is a relatively new urban development approach in developing Asian cities. An effective nature-based solution to manage floods, improve water quality, store groundwater. We saw with session 1 from Aping Chen about sponge cities in China, and ADB has actually been quite involved with this and helped pioneer it. But you know, these lessons have broadened to our members, and with ADB assistance, Bien Yen, Hue, Hai Giang, and Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, they've all taken these solutions of nature-based opportunities to rehabilitate ponds and parks and rivers for detention, improving water quality, but also increasing resilience to climate change impacts for more, and creating much more livable cities at the same time. Second, nature and climate change action must really work together to transform our food systems. In Asia, agriculture is responsible from 70 to 90% of water use in our countries. And also, you know, smallholder farmers are certainly some of the most vulnerable to climate impacts, yet have the least amount of resources to deal with it. So we need to create incentive mechanisms to engage farmers and agribusiness enterprises for climate resilient and ecosystem-based projects. This is a real challenge to make this business case. But one example is the Anhui Green Tea Farming Project, which was an example of a successful ADB agribusiness eco-compensation project in the PRC. So the mechanism piloted with ADB lending assistance incentivized ecological and friendly farming with an output-based eco-compensation scheme that also supported climate change. The farmers benefited as they received cash grants for reducing fertilizer use and pesticide application, and then are able to sell certified organic tea at the market, generating alternative and more sustainable income. And also with the reduced fertilizer use and improved tillage practices, you're reducing greenhouse gas effects, and obviously less fertilizer and less pesticides are good both for the soil and the water system. Third, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can scale up private sector finance, which is underutilized but viable opportunity. There's been a lot of talk about it, but the action, I think, has been more limited than the talk. But for instance, small and medium enterprises and agribusiness suffer from a lack of access to commercial financing due to the risk of investing in green projects with perceived low rates of return. But in turn, catalytic funds can facilitate equity or debt financing for qualified enterprises if they meet eligibility criteria for green economic development and adaptation targets. So ADB has worked to propose a new type of sustainable development goal accelerator bond aimed at Southeast Asian countries to tap into capital markets for SDG and nature positive outcomes. Financed activities may include organic farming, rural demonstration projects, water resources rehabilitation, and solid waste management. These all have impacts on the water cycle as well as climate change resilience. And so these SDG bonds have socioeconomic targets and offer different payment structure and guarantee mechanisms, which make them more attractive to investors. And basically, ADB is de-risking this to bring in crowd and private sector finance. And for countries then looking to fund sustainable projects and programs on a large scale, this can be an impactful mechanism. As noted by Per, we need to target our financing as efficiently and make it go as far as possible. So creating these opportunities is pivotal to accelerate the flow of private capital and increase the size and impact of environmental and climate projects. I'll stop with that. Thanks, Diego.
Great, thanks, Tom. And I think you covered three issues that we covered during the last 2 days, the scaling up of MBS, agribusiness, and private sector. So it was good to hear your examples. So thanks again. Let's move now to the presentation by Santiago Ochoa from the empresas from the water utility in Medellin. Santiago is a deputy manager for water operations and maintenance, and this is a very interesting case in which you see the role of the utility in water resources management, but also in bringing climate change into practice, into the strategies and daily operations. Santiago will be presenting in Spanish for you that need to shift to Interactio. And Santiago, te dejo el micrófono a ti. Gracias.
Diego, muchas gracias y un saludo muy cordial a todos. Pues muy contento de estar aquí. Vamos a avanzar rápidamente con nuestra presentación para que demos espacio a la agenda de lo que queremos hacer el día de hoy. Giovanna, ¿tú tienes ahí, por favor, la presentación? Gracias. Muy bien, avancemos. Bueno, contarles muy rápidamente quién es EPM. EPM es una empresa de servicios públicos domiciliarios estatal, es propiedad del municipio de Medellín 100%. Tenemos presencia en 6 países con 7 negocios y 44 empresas. En el sector de agua y saneamiento estamos en México, en Colombia y en Chile. Tenemos en México presencia en 9 ciudades, en Colombia en 23 ciudades y en Chile en 7 ciudades. Básicamente para que tengan una idea de quiénes somos en el grupo de PM. Adelante, por favor. Muy bien. Contarles un poco de cuáles son de pronto los elementos, las palancas de valor, los puntos clave fuertes que tenemos en EPM para trabajar el tema del agua y el saneamiento. El primero de ellos tiene que ver con la seguridad hídrica, entendida como el conjunto de acciones que estamos desarrollando para poder garantizarle a las generaciones actuales y futuras que estamos atendiendo que van a tener el suministro de agua potable para poder desarrollar sus actividades sociales y económicas con tranquilidad. Eso es un elemento muy importante para nosotros y creo que es el elemento que está direccionando hoy en día las acciones que vamos realizando. Por lo que hemos visto hoy y hemos discutido en este espacio sobre los efectos que el cambio climático están teniendo con la prestación del servicio de acueducto de alcantarillado. El segundo, que es muy importante también y complementario, casi que son una llave que tienen que estar siempre unidos, es el ambiente sano. El ambiente sano entendido como las actividades para poder desarrollar un entorno amigable con el medio ambiente que permita el desarrollo de la vida. Digamos que hasta ahí estamos hablando de temas que son un poco más técnicos y entramos ahora a un tema que es muy importante, que es la gestión social y el acceso a estos servicios. El cuarto elemento que queremos destacar es la economía circular y el quinto, pero no menos importante, es la transformación digital y la innovación, que son instrumentos para poder desarrollar toda esa, digamos, visión que se tiene de futuro de estos territorios. Avancemos, por favor. Muy bien, vamos a hablar un poco entonces de cada uno de estos elementos muy rápidamente. El primero de ellos es la seguridad hídrica. Hoy el mundo se debate en todas partes, por diferentes razones, en la necesidad de garantizar el suministro de agua potable. Hay elementos claves que están haciendo generar una situación como de estrés hídrico, porque si bien puede tenerse mucha abundancia de agua en el planeta, los sitios donde está disponible el agua están distantes de los sitios donde se requiere consumir. Entonces, hay una demanda creciente de agua para agricultura, industria y suministro para la población, que es un elemento clave. Hay una concentración de las personas en el mundo que prefieren vivir en ciudades, haciendo que esa demanda se concentre en puntos específicos, y hay un fenómeno o un desarrollo de todo lo que hemos visto de cambio climático que hace que los eventos de escasez de agua y de abundancia de agua sean más extremos. Frente a esto, nosotros hemos hecho como acciones en dos vías, unas de protección y conservación, buscando entonces recuperar los ambientes naturales y que permitan garantizarnos a futuro que esas fuentes de agua van a estar protegidas, y para eso hemos hecho una protección de más de 103.000 hectáreas de bosques donde están las fuentes que nos proveen el agua potable a través de una estrategia de fondo del agua, pero también acciones de mitigación. La mitigación entendida como una adaptación a esos impactos que el cambio climático nos están a nosotros dando en estos momentos. La foto que ustedes ven en la parte superior izquierda es un equipo de ultrasonido que está en uno de nuestros embalses para controlar el crecimiento de algas que pueden llegar a ser perjudiciales para la salud de los habitantes. Hace 20 años no era necesario tener este tipo de dispositivos porque los efectos climáticos que estábamos viviendo pues no lo requerían. Hoy es una necesidad. Sin estos equipos, probablemente en algunas ocasiones del año, por los efectos del clima, no fuese posible tratar las aguas de estos embalses. En el tema de ambiente sano, hemos trabajado muy fuertemente en recoger y tratar las aguas residuales que se generan en los ambientes urbanos. Ustedes pueden ver que tenemos que entrar a sectores con condiciones de desarrollo urbanística muy precaria, como la que estamos viendo en la parte inferior derecha, pero también sectores donde el desarrollo urbanístico es mucho más generoso. El tema del saneamiento nos ha brindado, además de los beneficios naturales por el tratamiento de las aguas residuales, que es un impacto positivo en el medio ambiente porque ya las fuentes naturales no tienen la descarga contaminante, nos permite otro par de beneficios muy grandes. El primero de ellos es poder aprovechar las fuentes, los entornos de los ríos, como lo ven en la parte inferior, para permitirle a la sociedad en un sitio de encuentro en torno a las corrientes de agua. Aquí en Medellín tenemos parques del río, que es este desarrollo que vemos acá, pero en torno a todos los afluentes al río principal se genera una actividad deportiva, comercial y cultural durante todo el año. Digamos que es propiciar que la sociedad se desarrolle de frente a los ríos y no de espaldas a ellos, que es lo que ocurre cuando los ríos terminan siendo cloacas. Avancemos, por favor. Mirando entonces el tercer elemento que mencionamos de acceso y comprabilidad. Nosotros tenemos una serie de programas que hemos denominado Conexiones por la Vida, Unidos por el Agua, Habilitación Vivienda, que nos ha permitido llegar a todos los rincones de la ciudad, incluso aquellos que tienen un desarrollo muy precario, pudiendo entonces no solo llevar el servicio de acueducto y alcantarillado, sino también un mejoramiento de las condiciones del entorno. Es muy importante porque la ingeniería nos puede brindar soluciones para los temas de acueducto o alcantarillado, pero necesitamos que los ciudadanos tengan acceso a esos servicios y puedan comprarlos. Ahí, por ejemplo, programas como el agua prepago permiten acondicionar el pago a las condiciones en que un ciudadano se gana la vida diariamente. Lo otro entonces, el cuarto elemento que queremos destacar tiene que ver con la economía circular y es el aprovechamiento de esos recursos que se generan en los procesos que estamos haciendo en nuevas cadenas productivas para dinamizar la economía. Un ejemplo muy claro de esto, lo que estamos haciendo en la planta Aguas Claras de tratamiento de aguas residuales, donde estamos aprovechando todos los subproductos. El agua que está tratada está siendo descargada a un río que está aumentando los niveles de oxígeno por encima de 5 miligramos por litro, lo que permite una regeneración del ecosistema, de la biótica y la fauna en este río. Estamos utilizando el biogás para generar energía eléctrica y hoy en la planta estamos teniendo producciones del 50% de la energía que se requiere para el tratamiento se genera con este biogás en el proceso de biodigestión. Y los biosólidos los estamos utilizando como abonos para recuperar suelos. Entonces, un buen ejemplo de economía circular es este. Y pasemos ya para mirar la última diapositiva, donde queremos contarle el tema de innovación y transformación digital. Miren, el mundo ha buscado en 3 instrumentos fundamentales combatir el tema del estrés hídrico: la eficiencia en el uso del recurso agua, el reuso del agua residual tratada y la desalinización como fuentes que permiten tener disponible un mayor volumen de agua. Nosotros en todos estos frentes hemos estado trabajando en México, en Chile y en Colombia. Y finalmente el tema de la transformación digital y toda la analítica de datos, que lo que nos permite es ser mucho más eficientes en la operación de los sistemas, optimizando el uso del agua y teniendo la analítica como instrumento para que podamos inducir a los ciudadanos a mejores comportamientos frente al recurso hídrico, que cada vez es mucho más escaso. Yo quisiera entonces, esta era la presentación que habíamos traído rápidamente para resumir un trabajo que hemos hecho juiciosos durante los últimos años y que nos ha permitido alcanzar altos niveles de desarrollo en la prestación de servicios. Muchas gracias, Diego, y gracias a todos.
Santiago, many thanks for your presentation. This is, I think, the way that utilities should operate in the from now on. The issue how we can scale up and take your model to the rest of the world. But again, many thanks. I wish we had more time, but time is limited. Let me finish by passing the floor to Olympus to give some final remarks and a brief summary of what we went through the last 3 sessions. Olympus, the floor is yours for your closing remarks, and thanks for everyone for sticking around with us.
Thank you very much, Diego. I'm aware I've got just a few seconds to do the closing remarks. So I'm I'm just going to go straight into more of a vote of thanks, mainly for all that have participated in the last 3 sessions. I think they've been great sessions, power-packed and information-packed sessions. So I just want to appreciate all that have participated, starting with the keynote speakers that have graced these last 3 sessions and the hard work that has gone into this, all that have presented to us presentations, abstracts, case studies. They are greatly appreciated. We appreciate the time that has been put into this. The team that has worked around the clock to make these sessions a success, we appreciate that. I hope the audience have found this quite useful. And these sessions have been recorded. If you need more information on this and revisit some of the points that have been visited, you can go back to these sessions. But I guess just as a last second, review from our side, we'd like to thank everybody and appreciate all the hard work that has gone into this. And back to you, Diego. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olympus. With this, we close the session. Again, we want to thank all of the participants and the panelists and the organizers and all the support team that we had in these 3 events. Thanks again, and best of luck in the remaining sessions of the week.
Ciao, ciao.